Hi, everybody. I'm excited for this devotional because I think it's about one of the most helpful, just practically helpful, and really actually joy giving truths and ways that the gospel is supposed to function and does function as we draw, as kind of we move forward in life and grow in our kind of walking with Jesus. And it's reason number 19 to rehearse the gospel to ourselves in a gospel primer. And it's titled Exposed by the Cross, Part 1, but really it's talking about how the gospel exposes our sin. And before you just turn it off and say, okay, I don't need that today, trust me, this is helpful, super helpful, and actually really joy giving when we experience it. So stick with me, all right? So here we go. It was while rehearsing gospel truths in Romans 5 through 8 that the Apostle Paul was moved to speak of his struggle with sin and exclaim, "O wretched man that I am." That's in Romans 7. While reviewing God's abundant saving grace on another occasion, Paul was prompted to confess that he was the foremost sinner of all, and that's in 1 Timothy chapter 1. So likewise, the deeper I go into the gospel, the more I comprehend and confess aloud the depth of my sinfulness. A gruesome death like the one that Christ endured for me would only be required for one who is exceedingly sinful and unable to appease a holy God. Consequently, whenever I consider the necessity of Christ's death and the manner of Christ's death, along with the love and selflessness behind it, I am laid bare and utterly exposed for the sinner that I am. So it's humbling. Such an awareness of my sinfulness does not drag me down, but actually serves to lift me up by magnifying my appreciation of God's forgiving grace in my life. So you hear that? Such an awareness of my sinfulness does not drag me down. That's where we're tempted. We're tempted to think, oh, if I look at the cross, if I hear about Christ dying for me, I'm just going to feel condemned. I'm just going to feel dragged down. I need to avoid any mention of my weakness and my failure and my sin and my need for mercy because it'll make me feel bad. But actually, the gospel serves to lift me up by magnifying my appreciation of God's forgiving grace in my life. And the more I appreciate the magnitude of God's forgiveness of my sins, the more I love him and delight to show him love through heartfelt expressions of worship. Okay, so here's how it works. There's another book that we like around here called The Gospel-Centered Life, and it has one of the most helpful illustrations of this concept and this experience that I've seen, and it works like this. Okay, so this is my amazing. We put our graphical team to work here at Fellowship to come up with this. Actually, yeah, I'm the graphical team today. So here's your life. You're going along, you hear the gospel. And when you hear the gospel, you have to understand a couple things. One is you have to understand God is holy, and we're not. So God's holy, he's perfect, and we have to understand that to some extent, and we're not. My sinfulness, I have to understand that I'm a sinner, I've sinned against God. And when I understand God is holy and I can't meet his standard and that I've sinned against him, that's when the cross makes sense. And so then I have to understand the cross, that Christ died for my sins, that I need forgiveness through him. And when I am convicted of my sin and believe that God is holy and righteous, then I see I need Jesus and I believe in what he did for me. And so I trust in the cross and I become a Christian at this point. Now, when I'm saved and when you're saved, our understanding of our own sin is like this. Our understanding of God's holiness is like this. And therefore, our kind of gratitude for the cross, as great as it might be, is still in its beginning stages. And our love for God, as great as it might be, is still in its beginning stages. And so the cross is here. Now, as I continue on in the Christian life and open myself up to the truth of the Bible, my understanding of just how awesome God is and just how perfect God is and how holy he is and how high his standard is for us, which is his own standard, the more I understand just how far I've failed, and how much I've sinned against him, right? And over time, I discover the depth of my sin is greater. Like Paul, I mean, First Timothy, he wrote First Timothy towards the end of his life, and he says in the present tense, "I'm the foremost sinner." And so you say, well, that sounds unhealthy. That sounds, depressing, but it's not depressing. What happens as we grow in our grasp of just the goodness, righteousness, perfection of God, and simultaneously grow in conviction of our own brokenness and our own failure, we're humbled, first of all, and we come to treasure the cross more. The cross gets bigger in our hearts and in our minds. We come to exult, like Paul said, in the cross of Jesus Christ. That's what becomes more and more our joy. So rather than trying to kind of prop up our righteousness and make ourselves look great, we can be like Paul and say, hey, I'm the foremost sinner, in order to point out that we've been forgiven, right? So the more we look at the cross, the more we go, wow, why would the Son of God have to come and die for me? The more we are convicted of our sin, the more we go, I am so grateful that Jesus died for me. And the more we're set free from the kind of lie that we have to walk around trying to convince everybody that we're perfect and righteous, trying to get people to exult in how great we are. And instead we can say, look at Jesus. Thanks be to God. And he's the person who will set us free. And so as we look at the cross, our understanding of our own sinfulness gets bigger and greater, or worse. But as we are convicted of our own sin, if we keep our eyes on Jesus, our gratitude for what he did for us grows, our love for God grows, our worship grows, our outward focus grows, and it makes it so much easier for us to commend Jesus to others, because he's not a hard taskmaster who's just looking to take from you. He's somebody who comes to people as broken as me, and he says, Mark, you're mine. Mark, I'm going to die for you. Mark, I'm going to give you life. And so it becomes a joy to tell others about this Jesus. All right, that's it for today. Come back on next week, probably Wednesday, and we'll look at how the cross helps us in relation to what others think of us, which is a huge thing.